Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here once again with Tom Orr. Tom, how's vacation going?
It's great. I don't want to say where we are, but it's one of the states that we're going to talk about in this show.
Oh, a staycation. Oh, isn't that great? Staying in Ohio, keeping the money in Ohio. Great job. Today's show is, we teased it a little bit in last week's show. I got a tweet. Tom and I got a tweet the other day, which was maybe eight or 9 days ago now, saying that on Twitter there was some discussion about a tale of the tape or going position by position, who's better, Michigan or Ohio State, and they wanted our take. So I thought, you know what, let's just go ahead and make a show of it. And this is that show. And Tom, I didn't really do any type of rundown other than I wrote down the positions so that we would know, in case we ever forgot, like what football positions are. But we could start at a position. We'll start at quarterback, and we'll just go, right down the line with Shea Patterson, who is now is he now a fifth-year senior? He's experienced, been starting for almost ever. They've got more depth than Ohio State, that's for sure. They have, Shea Patterson is an experienced guy. Justin Fields is not. So I think this is one you have to give to Michigan based on what we know. And what we know is that Patterson has put up numbers. And he is an experienced guy. He's seen the bullets flying. He's made mistakes and he's learned from them. Justin Fields hasn't done any of that. But if we were to do these rankings in November, I'm trying not to project too much greatness for Justin Fields because maybe it's not fair. But a year ago at this time, would we have gone with Dwayne Haskins over Shea Patterson? And I don't think it would have been crazy to do that. And we probably would have. And we had those same discussions. Like, we expect him to do very well, but we've only seen glimpses. So to put too much on him is kind of, it might be right, but is there a reason for it? That's where I am here. I expect Justin Fields to put up huge numbers and to be an all Big Ten guy. But if we're doing it right now, I've got to give this one to the Michigan side of the ledger just because of the knowns.
Exactly. You know what Shea Patterson is, and it's probably realistic to say that Justin Fields has a higher ceiling than Shea Patterson. I don't think that's probably a particularly controversial statement. And it's probably fair to say that Justin Fields, before he leaves Ohio State, will be a better quarterback than Shea Patterson is by the time he leaves Michigan. That's probably not particularly controversial. It remains to be seen exactly how accurate Fields is going to be. That's kind of the big question, and that's my big reservation. I think athletically, Fields probably has a stronger arm than Patterson. Fields is faster than Patterson, but we don't know quite how accurate he is right now. We don't know what he's going to look like in this system, his first year in the system. The backup quarterback, Gunnar Hoke, it's his first year in the system. If Fields gets hurt, there's a decent probably drop off to Hoke. I think that's probably a reasonable thing to think. And neither of them, Fields at least had the chance to go through spring ball is one of the reasons I'm saying that. Hoke didn't even go through spring ball. So that's, you're really pushing it to throw someone in there if he's been on campus for just a couple months and Fields gets hurt in the season opener and you're throwing Gunnar Hoke out there. Mm-hmm. That's a tough spot to put him in. Michigan, Patterson's got more experience. He was their starter last year. Dylan McCaffrey's the backup. He has quite a quarterback pedigree and also has been in the system. I think this is his third year there. So he's obviously, you've got a new coordinator there, but there's going to be probably some common elements. And so that's all stuff that I think would point to Michigan, at least for now. But like you said, you get to November, if Fields' learning curve is what I think it could be, this could be a much more interesting discussion by the time by the time there actually is a head-to-head competition between them.
Because you look at Brandon Peters, who was probably their number 4 quarterback who transferred out to Illinois. If he had gone to Ohio State, he'd be battling to be the backup. So that gives you an idea of the levels of the depth between the two and the drop-off if the starter was to go down. So, yes, Michigan gets this one, and for good reason. Now, running back, Tom, this is a close one to me because, Ohio State does not have a running back who could start who was once a walk-on defensive back like Michigan. So, Ohio State is missing that element at running back. Ohio State is also missing the element of relying upon a true freshman like Michigan is to come in and possibly start. So that's another area that Ohio State does not have that Michigan does. And then also they're the best, they're the most running back with the most potential that is returning. I think is sophomore Christian Turner, who was a 3-star guy, and really, that's all they have. They've had to move. They signed a running back / linebacker who, in this class, I think I'm just looking, but anyway, he came in as a linebacker. They already had to move him to running back. So it's a situation at Michigan. We don't even need to talk. I'll let you talk about Ohio State, Tom, because we've mentioned this before, but Michigan's running back situation right now is not good, and it needs to get better quickly. Now, it could be okay if freshman Jack Charbonnet is as good as everybody thinks or as everybody hopes, and then you got True Wilson, the former walk-on defensive back, who was an okay number 3 guy last year, and then if you get Christian Turner to do well again, it's an okay 3 guys, and I could see an instance where Michigan fans would be like, they could be really good, and they could, but they're not as good as Ohio State.
This just looks like a running back room from like Northwestern. Like you've got the one guy who's like, hey, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And then you've got the guy who used to be a defensive back, and like it is not the kind of running back room you'd expect from Michigan. And I mean, you didn't mention this, but Chris Evans, who is the presumptive starter, is suspended for the season for academic misconduct. So that's why they have kind of found themselves in this position. I mean, Ohio State has J.K. Dobbins. The best case scenario for Michigan is Zach Charbonnet comes in and plays like J.K. Dobbins did 2 years ago as a true freshman, and at some point one day in the future is as good as J.K. Dobbins is right now. Like that's probably about the best case scenario for them. And, the best case scenario for Ohio State is J.K. Dobbins is 2 years of experience better than he was 2 years ago. So that's better. So yeah, this is a pretty easy one, even before you get to the depth. And, DeMario McCall is a little bit of a question mark because of injuries and how much is he going to play. But you could put DeMario McCall, you could put J.K. Dobbins on the Michigan team, and he would be their best running back. You could put DeMario McCall on the Michigan team, he would be their best running back. There's a possibility that Marcus Crowley or Steele Chambers would be somewhere in the Master Teague. Master Teague probably
he'd be their best running back.
He'd probably be their best running back, and then you have Marcus Crowley and Steele Chambers, and those are guys who, I mean, if they're going to start a true freshman, those are guys who have the recruiting pedigree to be getting carries in that offense. So it's like the top 3 for Ohio State are all better than anyone Michigan has right now, and numbers 4 and 5 are probably right in that conversation as well. So yeah, this is even less of a conversation really than the quarterback one was.
Yeah. Now, receivers is an interesting one for me because I've had to do my Big Ten ratings. I've done the receivers, and you look at the magazines, and everybody just immediately puts Michigan there because of Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black, and Nico Collins. Mostly Tariq Black we can set aside, but his potential, it might be greater than the other two, but he can't stay healthy. So to use him as a reason why Michigan's receivers are great is kind of maybe a little bit of wishful thinking, and obviously we all hope that he's healthy and able to do what he is capable of. But you've got those three. Ronnie Bell, a sophomore who was rated super low last year because he was a basketball player. He came in, played well as a true freshman. I know they've got a true freshman slot receiver that played well in the spring. And
Mike Sain-Ristel.
Yeah, thank you, because I was trying to work out the pronunciation. But so they like him. They lost Oliver Martin to Iowa. He hasn't played. But for me, I go the overall depth that Ohio State has is greater than what Michigan has. And if you just go like piece by piece, Donovan Peoples-Jones, a lot of his time at Ohio State has been in the slot. He played more outside a little bit last year, but if we go to the top two receivers, and it's now KJ Hill as a slot guy, he put up better numbers than either of Michigan's outside receivers, but Ohio State threw the ball more. Austin Mack, Benjamin Victor, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and we both have, I think, huge expectations for Jalen Gill. These guys don't necessarily get to split reps as much. Donovan Peoples-Jones is on the field. Nico Collins is on the field, and these guys get a lot of work. But they're putting up, 40, 50 catches a year, 600 yards receiving. I think if Austin Mack and Benjamin Victor weren't splitting reps, they'd put up better numbers. And that's what we're talking about, numbers. But Austin Mack, before he got hurt, was on his way to having a very good season. A season similar to what Nico Collins put up last year, or even Donovan Peoples-Jones. And then you add in, what are we going to see from Chris Olave this year? KJ Hill might have 90 catches. Who knows? Overall for me, and I know I'm like one of the few, but I go Ohio State here because of the depth and because there are more knowns, even though like these knowns haven't had huge years. Austin Mack, Benjamin Victor have never really had more than maybe like 32 catches or 27 catches, 30 catches in a season. But they're splitting reps, and they would put up bigger numbers. But this is going to be their third year together, or not even together, but third year in the rotation as co-starters. There's more depth, there's more overall production, and there's just more of them. And so that's why I give this one to the Buckeyes.
You have to look at it. The stats are a little,
right.
You have to kind of parse them out a little bit because, yeah, Ohio State threw the ball substantially more than Michigan did last year. But also you've removed Johnny Dixon, Terry McLaurin, and Paris Campbell's numbers from that top level stat line, and those are three of the four leading receivers last year. So if you just look at the returning players, KJ Hill, 885 yards, has the most of any of those players, 70 receptions, by far more than either of the other guys, or any of the Michigan guys. Donovan Peoples-Jones was the leading receiver for Michigan. He had 47 catches for 612 yards, 13 yards per catch. And that's fine. Like 13 yards per catch is fine. KJ Hill was 12.6 yards per catch. Okay. But Ben Victor, 16.9 yards per catch. Chris Olave, 16.4 yards per catch. And Chris Olave, he only had 197 yards, but that was basically all in November. He more or less didn't do anything until the Michigan State game, and then just in that last month turned into a pretty significant deep threat and 3 touchdowns on 12 catches. And I mean, that's a pretty good receiver. And I don't know that you can feel that comfortable betting on Michigan over Ohio State here, because KJ Hill is like the surest thing there. I think he's got the best track record of anyone from either of those teams. Like, what you're going to get at a KJ Hill. You have the best chance to get 1,000-yard season out of KJ Hill out of any one of these receivers. I think I think that's probably not unreasonable to think, right?
My only contention with that is we do expect Michigan to open the offense up more, and if Tariq Black can't go, then you're basically, there's 3 real receivers who are going to get the ball at Michigan as opposed to maybe 6, 7 at Ohio State. So but yeah, KJ is going to get the ball so often. And if he is making more plays after the catch, I think if we're going to put bets on it, he would probably be the guy because he's going to be the guy getting the ball the most.
Well, he had 885 yards last year, and he shared the position with the guy who had 1,063 yards last year. Like,
that is true.
I mean, even if you basically divide the production in, shave 40% off the production out of that position overall, he still probably ends up somewhere around 1,000 yards. And, Michigan could very well end up with a 1,000-yard receiver. It's possible. We don't know. I mean, it's the speed and space thing. It's all great. Let's see how it actually looks, and let's see whether Jim Harbaugh actually lets them run it, or if he puckers up like he often will in certain circumstances and wants to man ball it. I think that the tiebreaker, if you want to go to a tiebreaker, is the depth. I mean, like you said, you've got Nico Collins, you've got Donovan Peoples-Jones, you've got Tariq Black if Tariq Black is healthy. That's three guys. They're all good, and Tariq Black is a great receiver, and it would be really great to see him actually get to play this year. He's been banged up for 2 years in a row now. But Ohio State's depth is just so much greater, and the quality of the depth there, if you just want to go by recruiting rankings, the quality of the depth there is just leaps and bounds ahead of what Michigan has there, just in terms of depth. Like the top line talent, the Tariq Black, the Donovan Peoples-Jones, like, yep, those are great players, but that level behind them, Ohio State is so far ahead in terms of depth there that it seems like you'd probably have to go with Ohio State.
Yeah, just looking at the stars that doing the Big Ten ratings, and this includes the tight ends and the receivers. Ohio State has 57 total stars in terms of recruiting rankings in the composite. Michigan has 52. And that's including, like I said, the tight ends, but just overall the depth, everything, it all points to Ohio State if you're looking at it properly. Tight ends, Ohio State loses Zach Gentry. The thing here is Michigan uses, did I say Ohio State loses Zach Gentry? Well, that's true too, I guess. Michigan loses him, but Michigan obviously uses the tight end more. We'll see if that continues. I know Ohio State thinks they'll be using the tight end more, having them on the field more. It's when you look at these two positions, though, and generally, you could just assume that Michigan has the better tight ends. Here, this is the best group of tight ends at Ohio State in a long, long time. They have three guys who could be a starting tight end in the Big Ten right now, be starting tight end at Ohio State. And Luke Farrell, Rashad Berry, and Jeremy Ruckert. Michigan, similarly, they have Sean McCune, who has played a bunch. Nick Eubanks is a guy who can get down the seam. That's, those are the big guys. Mustafa Muhammad was a top 4-star recruit, is another guy that will be involved this year. But Tom, I guess again, here I go back to the depth, the recruiting rankings. We're not even talking about Jake Hausman, who was at one point the number one tight end in the 2016 class, before he dropped down a little bit. But another talented guy who has had trouble staying healthy and putting it all together. But I really like this group of Ohio State tight ends. I like Michigan's tight ends as well. I just think Ohio State has more potential and more explosion. And whether they get the ball as much as Michigan's, we'll see. But I like this group better than the Wolverines group.
Well, I think if you put the Ohio State tight ends on the Michigan roster, they would put up better numbers than the Michigan tight ends put up on the Michigan roster. It has been a running joke for literally 20 plus years that Ohio State forgets they have a tight end sometimes. And you see that sort of manifest itself in the stats. Zach Gentry had more than 500 yards receiving for Michigan last year. The leading tight end receiver for Ohio State had, 205 for Luke Farrell last year. And Rashad Berry, 9 catches, 78 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. Like, you remember Rashad Berry having a big year last year because you probably remember that Maryland game where he had some big catches in overtime. But they don't use the tight end as much just because they have such good wide receiver talent. So I do expect something of a move forward. Like, this is if you are looking for someone to consider a potential breakout person this year, Jeremy Ruckert, 1 catch for 13 yards last year. I would be interested to see what happens with Jeremy Ruckert this year. I don't know how many snaps there are going to be, just given how much other talent there is, to be able to run pass routes for Justin Fields. But if you put Jeremy Ruckert on that Michigan offense, he could be someone who had a 400 or 500 yard season.
Yeah, very easily. So you're saying Michigan tight ends on that one, huh?
I guess if we're just going purely by the stats they're going to put up, yes. But if you're going by the talent in the room, no.
Now here's let's go to the offensive line, because this is one where I really, really like what Ohio State's offensive line is going to be this year, and I think it's going to be a very good one. It could possibly be the best offensive line in the Big Ten. But Michigan is returning 4 starters. Ohio State is returning 1. Even though one of those 4 starters from Michigan is left tackle John Runyon, a first-team All-Big Ten guy. I don't know that he was actually that good. But you've got Ben Bredesen at guard, who was a second-team All-Big Ten guy. Their other guard was Michael Onwenu, who was also, I think, a second or third team. And center Cesar Ruiz was a third-team guy. And you compare them to what Ohio State is going to have, and the accolades aren't there. The experience isn't there. The starts aren't there. But what is there, Tom, is this is an Ohio State offensive line that could be starting 3 guys who are 1.5-star offensive linemen. And that's redshirt freshman Nicholas Petit-Frere at right tackle, redshirt sophomore Wyatt Davis at right guard. Josh Myers was originally a 5-star guy. His rankings eventually dropped once he got to the camps, and they saw that he still needed some work pass blocking, but he's your starting center. Those 3 guys, and then, by the way, here's Thayer Munford, who is entering his second season as a starter at left guard, and here's maybe third-team All-Big Ten guard Jonah Jackson stepping in, or perhaps it's Brandon Bowen. I think this Ohio State offensive line, and this is another thing like the Justin Fields thing, talk to me again in November. Right now, I have to give it to Michigan, but I feel like I will disagree with myself in November.
Right. The right now conversation, this is a little bit like the quarterback spot.
Exactly.
Where right now, Michigan has returning starters that Ohio State doesn't have, and the top level, 100 percentile outcome for the Ohio State players is probably higher than what the Michigan one is, but they're not there yet. And this is Michigan. Michigan has not just 4 returning starters, but 3 of those 4 were top 100 recruits. There are a lot of spots where Ohio State's recruits were rated substantially higher than Michigan's. And, it's easy. Everyone then says AJ Hawk was a 3-star, and that's all well and good, but there is a strong correlation between if you were a 5-star recruit and your likelihood of being an All-American, being a first-round NFL draft pick, all of that kind of stuff. So when there's any kind of question, you bet on the higher-ranked recruits. And Ohio State, across the deck, has higher-ranked recruits. But Michigan has guys who have a couple of years of experience on the Ohio State guys, and who also are really no slouches. I mean, I think that for sure it's completely fair to say Michigan has an advantage right now, but get to November, and I would be very surprised if this year's Ohio State offensive line was not substantially better than last year's Ohio State defensive line, especially by the end of the year. And given how young some of them are, there's a possibility that they could be very, very good in 2020.
Yeah, I'm with you. So we'll give that one to Michigan. Tom, let's just go ahead and do the defensive line as a whole, because if we split it up to defensive ends and defensive tackles, that's going to give Ohio State 2 right there. So let's just try to put this all in one and try to keep things as even as possible, because when you look at Michigan's defensive line, some of these guys, they played, they were backups last year for a defense for Michigan's starting defensive line, and they played here and there. And I could give you the names like Kwity Paye, junior defensive end, Aiden Hutchinson. I think he's an in-state guy, but he had a solid freshman year last year. Had flashes. He's a sophomore this year. Carlo Kemp, defensive tackle, and who's going to be the other defensive tackle? Is it going to be Donovan Jeter? Is it going to be Michael Dwumfor, who played last year? But these guys they weren't super productive and not everybody's going to be super productive as backups, but they didn't flash as much as you would hope next year starters would. And, when Chase Young is a freshman, he flashes. And when Robert Landers, as a redshirt freshman in 2016, had 7 tackles for loss in the first 5 games, these guys flash. And you just didn't see that much from those guys last year, which has me thinking I'm not going to see too much from them this year. And what we do see isn't going to be as good as what we'll see from an Ohio State defensive line, which has 3 seniors: Jonathan Cooper, Robert Landers, Davon Hamilton Jr., and Chase Young. Then all 7 or however of the class they brought in last year, those guys are all a year older. Jayshon Cornell, another senior. Overall, the depth is just ridiculous, and the talent is just as advanced. As many as just as the depth is above Michigan's depth, so is the talent, in my opinion, on this defensive line. And this is maybe the biggest no-brainer of the bunch, even with the running backs.
Yeah, this is the easiest decision on the field, and it's not even close. Ohio State has better recruits, more top-end talent, more depth, more experience, the better defensive line coach, and just to put a cherry on top of it, they took Michigan's defensive line coach, and now they have him too. Like it's
Jeez.
Like there's not a comparison here. This is last year Ohio State had a better defensive line than Michigan, but Michigan at least had some of the top end talent like Rashawn Gary, Chase Winovich, where it's like, yeah, these are guys who are good, solid, high end Big Ten players. And Rashawn Gary probably didn't live up to the recruiting hype that he had. He was probably a little miscast in that Michigan defense, which is a whole separate discussion. But this is without question the most lopsided position group, even beyond running back, which is really saying something. I mean, this is, if you are looking for the reason why Michigan is not going to get to the playoff like some people are predicting them to, the defensive line, I think, is it. Because this is, I mean, you have seen with Clemson, and Alabama, you need that absolutely huge mauling defensive line to control the line of scrimmage, keep the other team from being able to run it, pressure them, don't let the quarterback get comfortable back there. This is the defensive line that if Michigan somehow gets into the playoffs, they are going to get Notre Dame's. Like, they are going to get completely destroyed by a team that is much better in the trenches. But I think that the line is probably going to be enough of a liability that it will keep them from getting to the playoff, and so they won't have that issue.
And I mentioned Carlo Kemp. He started 12 games last year and finished with 17 tackles and 2.5 tackles for loss. So even a guy that I'm sure Buckeye fans have, this is maybe the first time they're ever hearing of Carlo Kemp, and this is one of their starting defensive linemen at Michigan. So it's just a group that, while we like, they like Kwity Paye and everybody likes Aiden Hutchinson, and when you have when you move your fullback over, and he is maybe getting reps as your nose tackle, Ben Mason, that's not good. And, we go back to 2012 when Zach Bourne moved from fullback to starting middle linebacker. It's not because he was a great middle linebacker. It's because they had a bad situation at middle linebacker. And yes, Michigan's offense is kind of going away from the fullback. But when your fullback moves to nose tackle and is already getting, some attention there, you hope it's just because of the novelty of it, and that's why there's talk. You hope it's not because, gosh, he's actually our best nose tackle, and we're going to see a lot of him. Because if you are, that's a failure of recruiting right there.
Well, that's a spot that Ohio State didn't find themselves in quite that dire straits a couple of years ago. But I mean, there was a time when Ohio State had missed on defensive tackles for a couple of years in a row, and it can get a little thin there, and then you're one injury away from disaster. And that's probably where Michigan is. Like, the top level talent isn't amazing there. It's fine. It's probably a little above average in the Big Ten, maybe. But there's not a whole lot behind it. And if they can't rotate that defensive line, that's when you wear down during the course of the game, during the course of the season. And if someone gets hurt, then it's a total disaster pretty much immediately. So this is probably the third time I've brought this up during the last few months, because it is just this absolutely glaring, flashing red light siren warning. Hey, danger, Will Robinson, your defensive line is maybe going to be a complete disaster at some point this year. And that's something that it's an easy position to overlook, because, they have the shiny story about the 5-star quarterback and all these flashy wide receivers and the new offensive coordinator who's going to revolutionize everything. But if you're just getting run over and the other team, you can't get the other team off the field, then those shiny offensive toys just sit on the sidelines. Yeah,
and Josh Uche, who is a linebacker who is a pass rush specialist, maybe he is a full-time defensive end. I don't know but when a linebacker is your best pass rusher, that says a lot about your pass rushers. And Uche, as we always talk about with Michigan's defensive line, as the season goes on, they wear down. And same case for him. He had, I think, 7 sacks in the first 9 games, and then none in the last 4. That's none against Rutgers, Indiana, Ohio State, or Florida the last 4 games, and really a non-entity in those games. And you would expect that from a linebacker who is asked to pass rush so much and going against bigger guys. And yeah, your speed works for so long until it doesn't, and you wear down. And we'll see as it won't really matter when we talk about the linebackers as well, which is amazing to me. But if you want to call him a defensive end, call him a linebacker. It doesn't help Michigan's cause in this, but he's one of those guys that can play either way. Ohio State is sort of getting into that with, I think, maybe like a Craig Young or Cade Stover, or even Mitchell Melton, who we talked about in last week's show. But let's go ahead and move to the linebackers now. And I really don't even know. Should we include the Vipers and the Bullets and the linebackers, or in the safeties, Tom?
I have them listed with the linebackers in my notes, so I guess we better do that.
All right. And that's fine. And really, we're talking about the same defensive system. Vipers are Bullets. They're the hybrid linebacker safety. And really, to include those is the only way to make this a fair contest between the two, because when Michigan, they lost, what's his face from last year, the middle linebacker, Tom.
Devin Bush.
Yeah, it's like, what's the, I flipped the calendar and everybody's gone, but I'm going back to last year when Michigan fans would have their linebackers this year, probably starting juniors Devin Gill and Josh Ross together, middle linebacker, weak side linebacker. When those guys were on the field, Michigan fans were not happy. And now those might be your 2 starters. We'll see a situation similar at Ohio State, Michigan, where the Sam and the Bullet they'll switch, they'll rotate with each other, and who that Sam will be for Michigan, maybe that is Josh Uche. Last year or the year before, it was Noah Furbush, who's a bigger guy. Really, Khaleke Hudson, who is their Viper, is the biggest name of note. But when you look at the year he had in 2017 compared to the year he had last year, they're like different players. And he took over for Jabril Peppers in 2017, had a better year than Jabril Peppers, finished with 82 tackles, and then 18 tackles for loss, and something like 8.5 sacks, and had 8 tackles for loss in a single game. But then last year, the numbers dropped way, way down to like 3.5 tackles for loss and something in the 40s as total tackles, 44 total tackles. So which is the real Khaleke Hudson? We'll find out. I tend to think, and I don't know that we could put Brendan White ahead of him yet, Brendan White being Ohio State's Bullet. But I would expect a better year from Brendan White than what we saw from Khaleke Hudson last year with 44 tackles and 3.5 tackles for loss. So maybe give Michigan the edge there for me. But I don't really agree with myself on that one either. Then it just comes down to the other 2 linebackers and 3 linebackers really, because you're going to take Malik Harrison over anything that Michigan has. Tuff Borland has started forever. Pete Werner started an entire year last year. He'll be splitting reps with Brendan White as they switch from Sam to Bullet. And then you look at what's behind those guys, and it's more of that same depth that we talked about at defensive tackle, defensive line. And there's a lack of depth at Michigan's linebackers. And we don't even get to talk about Baron Browning or Taraja Mitchell, where these guys, if we just had a list of the names, we could probably go down them, Tom, and be like, yes, this Buckeye who doesn't get to play would start at Michigan. Yes, this guy who doesn't get to play would start at Michigan at linebacker. Because that's what this group of linebackers at Ohio State is. They are all starters at Michigan, and only 2 or 3 of them are going to start at Ohio State.
And as we've said, last year the linebacker play was kind of a disaster, and I don't think that was necessarily a function of the linebackers themselves and was probably more of a schematic issue. So, yeah, it's neither of these units really covered themselves in glory in terms of the guys who were on the 2019 teams. None of them had great seasons in 2018, but if you're just looking at the recruiting rankings and you're just looking at sort of projecting that forward and looking at the depth of the units, yeah, I think you have to go with Ohio State here. And
Tom, just real quick, Tuff Borland missed a few games at middle linebacker. Devin Bush last year, 80 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss. I think he skipped the bowl game. You look at Tuff Borland, 67 tackles, 9 tackles for loss. You say what you want about Tuff Borland, but there was some production there. And then Malik Harrison, everybody else in there as well. That's it seems strange or crazy, or, Buckeye fans might be like, whoa, if I-State is that much better at linebacker than Michigan, one, that's crazy. That's great. And where's all of the linebacker talent at Michigan? And maybe we'll see some popping up this year, but you don't really see it when you're watching. You don't really see, like, Devin Bush stood out early on as a young guy, and you don't really see much of that anymore or last year. Tom, let's go to corners, where Ohio State returns 2 starters. Michigan returns 1. Michigan also lost some depth there to transfer. Their next starting cornerback, they returned Lavert Hill, who was very good. I think he was first team by at least one of either the coaches or the media. So, good job there. I don't know if it's going to be Ambry Hill as their other corner, or Ambry Thomas. we don't really know. We know who is starting for Ohio State at corner, and I don't, you take Jeff Okuda, you take Lavert Hill, kind of a wash. Damon Arnett, whoever you've got starting at Michigan, you take that. Ohio State again, the recruiting is superior, and these, the young corners that we don't get to talk about, who don't get to play. Again, these guys, they might be guys who would start at Michigan, because I don't know that Michigan is really super stoked about starting Ambry Thomas at corner, or the recruiting. They've got a bunch of 3-star guys, several 3-star guys that were some of these like satellite signees, not necessarily satellite signees, but reaches. And Ohio State's reaches are, we settled for the coaches are like, yeah, we had to settle for the number 17 corner in the nation, and that's not, they're very different planes right now when we talk about recruiting in the secondary, other than Daxton Hill, who we'll get to in a bit. But corners for me, Tom, I'm going Ohio State.
And that's probably fair. I would think that there's a pretty good chance that Jeff Okuda goes ahead of Lavert Hill in the NFL draft. I mean, that's probably,
watch your mouth.
Yeah, I mean, there's that's probably at best a push for Michigan. And then on the other side of the ball, I mean, I know there are a lot of Ohio State fans who are not big fans of Damon Arnett, but he's a returning starter. He's a perfectly serviceable Big Ten cornerback, and that's better than the sort of mystery box on the other side of the field for Michigan. If they still had David Long there, then then you go with Michigan, but they don't. So yeah, I think you've probably got to go with Ohio State there. And corner is a position where that's a big position of emphasis in the 2020 recruiting class for Ohio State, specifically because there are some depth issues there. And even with Ohio State having depth issues, Michigan does not have a deeper corner unit than Ohio State does, I don't think. So that's pretty telling when Ohio State looks at the corner unit and sees it as a position of concern and some depth issues, and they're still no worse than Michigan for sure, and possibly even ahead. That's pretty telling.
When you don't have room for Shaun Wade, you're probably pretty good there. When you don't have room for the number 2 cornerback in the 2017 class right now at corner and had to move him to safety, that's probably a good sign. It's probably a sign that your corners are pretty deep, and you're going to be okay there. So we talk about Shaun Wade. Let's go ahead and move to safeties. Michigan has to replace Tyree Cannell. If we want to throw the nickels in here as well, because Michigan, fortunately, will also have to find a new nickel back, and I'm sure whoever they find it, maybe this is a place where Daxton Hill, the 5-star safety, just a ridiculous athletic freak, ripping off a 4.30 here or wherever he wants. Maybe that's a guy who you ease into the situation at nickelback, because I've seen some projections where they have him starting, and starting a freshman safety. Anytime you have to rely on a freshman, you're playing with fire, especially at the back end of the defense. Josh Metellus is back. I'm not a huge fan. He's good. He's fine. Last year, I think he was maybe a second team All Big Ten. Second team All Big Ten. He's a very good starting safety in the Big Ten, but he's not nearly perfect. He's not Malik Hooker, and nobody is anymore. But when you look at Michigan safeties, they're the product of Jim Harbaugh's recruiting, which is top heavy at times, and then the bulk of the team is built of these 3-star players that you're recruiting against, Purdue and San Diego State, where now this becomes the bulk of your team, and it shows up here as well. That's why Daxton Hill might be good enough, or might be one of those guys. But when I look at Ohio State, you've got Jordan Fuller, who will be returning. It'll be his third year as a starter. Sean Wade, we talked about, who was fantastic all spring long at strong safety with the ones. Those two, to me, are fine. Perfect. I don't know that you'll find, I don't think you'll find a better duo in the Big Ten. And then you've got some experience depth behind them. Not spectacular. We saw Isaiah Pryor have his struggles last year. Brendan White, they lose him to Bullet. He was pretty good at the end of the year last year, solidified that deep safety spot. But with Sean Wade and Jordan Fuller, give me those two guys. And we don't even get to talk about Josh Proctor and some of these other guys, but I'll take Ohio State's top two over Michigan's top two, no matter where Daxton Hill is in that. And I'll be happy with that. I'll be fine with that. I like Ohio State's safeties here.
If you're just going off recruiting pedigree, Daxton Hill and Sean Wade basically cancel each other out.
Yeah.
And I think Jordan and Sean Wade also, by the way, has 2 extra years of experience of not being a freshman safety, which freshman safeties, that's not a spot you want to have a freshman, because that's a spot where if you have one, you make one mistake or you forget what your assignment is, that's a real big problem. And it's a spot where Josh Metellus ended up having a nice year last year, but what do Ohio State fans remember of Josh Metellus? Josh Metellus dropped what could have been basically a game-clinching interception, like just right in his hands. Could have been basically a game-clinching pick six in 2017 from J.T. Barrett, and they lose the game. Last year, Josh Metellus was, I think he was the one who was chasing Paris Campbell on one of those end arounds where it was like when there was the Fiesta Bowl where Ted Ginn had an end around, and you just watched him just blow past Doug Daddish like the Roadrunner going past the Wile E. Coyote. That was Josh Metellus trying to catch Paris Campbell. Like, it's just, Josh Metellus coming out of high school was the 48th ranked safety in the nation, 105th ranked player out of Florida. He picked Michigan over Colorado, Florida International, Florida Atlantic. And he has turned into a good player. It's been a pretty good development job, but it's just, he is not, I think give me Sean Wade over anyone in the Michigan defensive backfield in terms of someone who could get drafted the next couple of years. You want to leave Daxton Hill out of that, that's fine. I would say give me Jordan Fuller over Josh Metellus in terms of where they're going to get drafted this time next year. It's just, I think that's another spot where Ohio State has, at worst, equal experience at the, from Jordan Fuller compared to Josh Metellus. And then the other position, you've got experience and talent probably advantage there. And then the depth there, the Josh Proctor and Isaiah Pryor and some of the other guys back there, I think that's another spot where you've got to go with Ohio State. And I know it seems like we keep saying, well, Ohio State has more depth and more talent there. There's a reason we keep saying that. And I went back and looked at the 2016, 2017, and 2018 recruiting classes. Michigan signed 77 players during those classes. Ohio State signed 72. Ohio State had 60 blue chip recruits, 4- and 5-star recruits, 60 to 42 for Michigan. Michigan signed 34 3-star players to 12 for Ohio State. So 34 to 12 3-stars from the 2016, 2017, 2018 classes. And that's where most of your time is going to be on the field this year. Like, that's, yeah. You might get some contributions from a few freshmen here and there, but the bulk of your roster is going to be made up from guys from those 2016, 17, and 18 classes. And Ohio State is 60 to 42 in the blue chips. There's a theory that Bud Elliott from SB Nation has, the blue chip ratio, where you have to have 50% blue chip players to be a national title contender, and Ohio State is 60 out of 72. That's well north of 50%.
Let me do the math on that.
Michigan, Yeah, Michigan is 42 out of 77, which is north of 77, but they also include some other years that Michigan, the numbers would not be as good. Some of the previous years. So just the blue chip ratio there for Ohio State compared to Michigan is not close, and you see that in the depth. Like you said, the top line talent is there, but once you get past that top line, it falls off pretty quickly. And, if Ohio State has an injury, they have another top 100 guy they can throw out there because the team is loaded with top 100 guys. And that's just not the case at Michigan. Michigan has a very good top line defense, but once you get past that, it thins out pretty quickly.
And, you got to stay healthy, just like at Ohio State at quarterback this year. Tom, let's move to an area where I think Michigan does have an advantage, and that's special teams. Not at punter, where Drew Chrisman is a better punter than Will Hart. Will Hart, I think, was actually first team All Big Ten last year. But let me tell you, I don't know, and 6, 7, 8 times I remember writing down during Michigan Monday, Will Hart has punted the ball into the end zone again. Compare that to Drew Chrisman, who can drop it wherever and spin it back or just drop it dead. To me, there's no comparison. Drew Chrisman is clearly the better punter. But for me, that's about the only area where Ohio State has a distinct advantage. We can talk about kick coverage, but really we don't know what that's going to look like. That's a year-to-year thing. If KJ Hill is returning punts again, don't expect much in the way of production. Just expect catches. Ohio State hasn't returned kickoffs very well since Sean Springs, maybe. And Michigan they have some good returners. Ambry Thomas has a kickoff return for a touchdown. Donovan Peoples-Jones has a punt return for a touchdown. So those are some productive guys. So I can give it, and the kickers are probably a wash. I can give Michigan the advantage here. And yeah, I don't see the return production from Ohio State to make it more of a contest.
Yeah, I guess there's always the possibility. I mean, Ohio State has the talent to do it, but somehow that never quite seems to manifest itself. Ohio State has had 5-star skill guys returning punts for a long time, and it doesn't seem like they return punts for touchdowns very often, and Donovan Peoples-Jones does. So, yeah, I guess you got to go there. I had forgotten, until I looked it up this week, Will Hart was the Big Ten punter of the year last year, which was
ridiculous.
I mean, I don't want to throw around a term like miscarriage of justice too lightly, but that was pretty clearly a miscarriage of justice.
It's like the people who voted on that didn't want to write down more than 9 letters. So they're just like, you know what? I am not expending myself at all. And this guy, his first and last name is the same as this punter's last name. And I've got things to do, so I'm just going to go Will Hart and save my ink. And really, that's how Ray Guy got it. That's why everybody loved Ray Guy. It's just easier that way, because that's how punters, that's what people think of punters.
Reggie Roby got the shaft.
Well, he was originally Reginald, and he's like, you know what? I'm never going to make the Pro Bowl like this. Let's just go with Reggie. And somebody else is like, well, what about just Reg? And he's like, you know what? Let me think about that.
Let me check my watch that I'm wearing on the field for some reason.
Tom, I still have a difficult time with the coaching thing, and where if you're just looking at, gosh, let's look at their Wikipedia, it's Jim Harbaugh. We talk about experience on the Ohio State defensive line, experience at linebacker, experience here, there. That's Jim Harbaugh. So it's almost like if I don't even know really how to do this with Ryan Day, and I've talked to other people, and they say if you were drafting, who would you take first? Who would you feel better about? how do you see this? Because I have trouble with this. So let me decide vicariously through you how to do this, because to me, it's if you're not going to look at it, or even if you are going to look at it, you can't drift too far from Jim Harbaugh. And if you are, it's because it's something you think rather than something you know.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically Jim Harbaugh is a very good coach. This is along the lines of what we talked about with James Franklin last week. I feel like we kind of know what Jim Harbaugh is and isn't at this point. And, maybe the Josh Gaddis thing just completely revolutionizes everything in Michigan. I mean, maybe. And maybe Jim Harbaugh stops being Jim Harbaugh in the negative way in big games and stops kind of puckering a little bit in big games. And because right now it feels like Jim Harbaugh has a ceiling. And Jim Harbaugh's ceiling is like, if everything breaks exactly right, they could go 11-1 and win the Big Ten and get into the playoffs and just get absolutely destroyed by Alabama in the playoffs. Like that seems like about what the ceiling for Michigan is right now, if everything breaks right. And everything has not broken right because they've been stubborn about some stuff they shouldn't have been stubborn about, and things have not quite broken right. And so you have that on one hand, and I think Ryan Day's ceiling is higher.
Yes.
Partly because Ryan Day has so much more talent, but we don't really know what Ryan Day is going to be right now either. So, I mean, this is like the, pick your sport, NFL draft. Do you pick the high upside guy who might not turn out to be, he's either going to be a big hit or not, and just kind of like a mid-level guy? Or do you take the kind of surefire, yeah, this guy's good, he's above average, maybe even very good, but he's not gonna be like an absolute all-timer? Like, do you take the surefire number 2 starter, or do you go for the guy who, I don't know, could be a Cy Young Award winner, could be a Hall of Famer, or just, he might be a 4th starter, we don't know, could be anywhere in there, and the range of outcomes is much wider. And I guess, this is probably along the lines of what we've talked about in a couple of these spots, like quarterback. You have to go with Harbaugh right now, probably just based on the track record. But if you look at what Ryan Day has done so far since December when he was announced as the next coach, just recruiting-wise, nothing has changed. And the vibe around the program, I mean, people have asked us about that a number of times, and I feel like there's not a huge change in the vibe around the program, that he seems like he's trying to keep things kind of status quo and just kind of keep the car going in the right direction. And if he can do that, and so far he has, and it's real easy to say that without fall camp having even opened yet and without any games having been played, if he can do that, then he will end up kind of ahead of Harbaugh, but he's not there yet just because you're kind of grading him an incomplete right now.
Yeah, and Harbaugh, meanwhile, has had 3 10-3 seasons and 1 8-5 season, and I think we all expect better than that from Ryan Day, much better than that in terms of the 8-5, but until we see it, like you said, it's an incomplete. So we can go ahead and give that one to Michigan. And Tom, I'm looking at the tail of the tape, as I'm sure everybody else is, as they scored along on their own scorecards. But when you look at quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, O-line, D-line, linebacker, cornerback, safety, special teams, and coach. So that's, 11 different things. 4 of those things we have sided with Michigan, and that would be quarterback, offensive line, special teams, and coach. None of those on defense, and one of those being quarterback. And as we look back and you say you're going to go with a Jim Harbaugh quarterback over a Ryan Day quarterback, are you sure you want to sign this? Are you sure you want to put your name to this? And the thing is, Tom, it's a podcast, so we don't have to sign it. And then we can retract anything we want later on. but a pretty interesting exercise that confirms, much of what we already knew. We'll see if that holds true in late November. But Michigan Stadium has got its work cut out for it in November, but sometimes sometimes the venue covers up a lot of errors and a lot of inequalities.
It seems like a lot of the areas where we ended up going with Michigan, it was Michigan right now, but by the time the game rolls around, it could be Ohio State. And that really wasn't the case with almost anything the other direction. I mean, Daxton Hill at safety, he could be ultimately the best of any of those players at safety. Maybe, but that's probably not going to happen this year. It might not happen next year. So, maybe you're talking 2021. I mean,
right.
It's a consistent enough depth advantage, and probably at least even in terms of top line talent, and then a consistent depth advantage almost across the board. And I'm sure it's easy to say, well, you guys are from Ohio, so of course you think that. But when you've won 16 out of the last 18 in the series, that's what the top line talent is, at least even, and also this depth advantage across the board. That's what that looks like on the field. So there's reason that you can wonder how long Ohio State can maintain this level in the post-Urban Meyer era, but that depth and that talent level has not fallen off yet. It doesn't look like it's falling off immediately in recruiting right now, so it's a question, but it's also kind of a little bit of wishful thinking probably from opposing fan bases right now as well.
I'm with you, Tom. So that does it for our Ohio State-Michigan Tale of the Tape. I want to thank all of the Michigan listeners. You're always welcome here. I want to thank the Ohio State listeners. You are always welcome here. The Penn State listeners, I don't know how you got here, but hey, you know what? You guys probably like football too, so you're welcome as well. Tom, anything else that we need to add, or before we say goodbye to the people?
Just that, hang in there. Big Ten Media Days are actually right around the corner.
It's crazy.
It is closer than you think. We are probably one more off-season week away, and then Gerd and I will be in Chicago and talking to some real live, honest-to-goodness football players and coaches, and getting ready basically the unofficial kickoff to the 2019 season. It is almost here.
So, Tom, can you let us know which 3 Buckeyes were invited to Media Days this year?
Based on history, I'm going to go with Drew Chrisman, Jordan Fuller, and Liam McCullough.
There you go. So we look forward to talking to those 3 guys here in the next week. So thank you all for listening. We will we'll have an instant reaction probably from Chicago, unless we just really want to get on the road, but we'll see how that goes. We should give you something from that, and then it's on almost. So thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you then.
Well, she threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car and leave tonight.